Welcome to the Muscle Expert Podcast with Ben Pakulski, one of the world's top professional bodybuilders, an expert on human performance and mindset mastery. Ben dives deep to deliver the strategies of the top experts to upgrade your body, mind, muscle, strength, performance, biochemistry, and how to become the upgraded modern man.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Muscle Expert Podcast. I am Ben Pakulski. Today we're going to talk about EMFs, electromagnetic frequencies. These things are real and they're everywhere and they're impacting our bodies, they're impacting our biology, they're impacting our physiology, how our body works. And I'm the canary in the coal mine. I'm the guy who walks into a room and can literally feel these things. And I talk about this a lot in the podcast is if I'm wearing a watch or if I have a cell phone in my pocket, I can literally feel these things. And I was like, is this normal? We talk about that a little bit on the podcast. We're going to teach you everything you need to know about EMFs. So how they work, where they're coming from, and are they really a thing to be concerned with? The gentleman I talk with today, Daniel Debaun, is an expert, and he's someone helping you shield yourself from EMFs, which I'm very grateful for. We get into a lot of really interesting things and the future of EMFs and how maybe we can learn to shield ourselves and protect ourselves in this world that's just bombarded with EMF. And to be honest, this is something that we should really be paying attention to, especially with young children, pregnant ladies, someone who has an evolving nervous system. Like you have to think about the implications of throwing extra electricity into an evolving nervous system is literally going to disrupt the way it works. It's going to disrupt the way your brain works or every cell in your body, which is an electrical you're an electrical being, and you need to pay attention to that stuff because if it's something's interfering with the signal, eventually over time that signal becomes white noise, or that low level signal is going to become muted because your body's just not going to work as well from having this constant exposure to this low level EMF, and sometimes not so low level EMF, which is going to cause more immediate things to happen, which we talk about all in the podcast. I'm extremely grateful for this guy. He's an engineer by trade. Now he's evolved into just trying to help people, which started off, again, you'll hear Daniel Debaun's conversation, but started off trying to help his children and have his children have children. So it started off from definitely a selfless place and has evolved into helping people all over the world to try to block ourselves and shield ourselves from this reality that we're living in this over-prominent EMF world. So without further ado, enjoy the episode with Daniel Debaun. So I'm curious to hear how you got involved in EMF and studying this stuff because it seems like you were way ahead of the curve, right? Everyone in the last 2 to 3 years is like, oh, we got to pay attention to all this technology and how it's ruining our biology and our physiology. Seems like you're someone who's way ahead of the curve. Can you tell me a little bit about how it started?
Yeah, I will. It turns out about 6 years ago or so. Well, first of all, I'll tell you first. I used to run technical laboratories for the Bell system. So I was pretty familiar with technology, all the electronics around us. We used to actually test network equipment and define the standards. So when you bought something for the network, it would work. Well, I retired from that a while ago, and my wife had the boys over on a holiday, and they had their laptops in their laps. So my wife says, I want grandchildren. So she somehow intuitively thought it wasn't good to have this electronics in your lap next to the testicles. Right? And so I said, well, I understand exactly what it could be. Let me see if science says the same thing, that it may be of danger. Ironically, there was a preponderance of information even back then that said, hey, this stuff's not good for you. It's like after a couple of hours, 25% of the male sperm is immobile. So this is not good for a male. So I said, well, let me think about it a little bit. So I said, well, I designed a product for my boys to use because I couldn't find it on the market. And their friends saw what we had and they wanted one. So all of a sudden, I started building products to defend the lap. Long story short, now we have many, many products that builds many, many solutions for protecting the body. So it was by self-preservation. And by the way, I still don't have grandchildren.
So tell me a little bit about what's happening there. So assume my audience knows about EMFs, but doesn't know actually what's actually happening there. And so when you first became aware of the fact that these frequencies were able to cause harm to the human genitalia or the human cells, what was your line of thought? Like, how did you go, okay, well, this is what's happening and this is how I'm going to fix it?
Well, you always look for the simplest way to solve an engineering problem. And so I knew what the signal looked like. I knew the composition of it. It was it had magnetics and it had electronics. I knew the frequencies that they were at, how it went into the air. And I needed to figure out, how did I stop it towards the body and yet still connect to the Wi-Fi or still connect to the cell tower. And so I created a simple device that simply stopped the signal from going towards your body. So if you put a laptop on your lap, it still connects to the router, but it doesn't go through, passes through and potentially damage the cells of your body. So it was like a simple way of solving a fairly complex problem. But what everyone didn't realize is that a RF signal, a radio frequency signal, a EMF, like you were referring to, is actually around 2. Remember 2. It's actually 2 gigahertz. It's around 2. A microwave oven is 2.3. Really, really, really close. So when you're cooking a piece of meat and you heat up the water between the cells oscillate. And what happens? It cooks your meat. If you want it well done, keep it in long. If you want it rare, keep it in a little time. Well, guess what? 2.3 is really close to 2. It's a thermally emitting signal. The power levels are much lower, but really low-level microwaves are dangerous.
So that perfectly leads into my next question is, like, how dangerous that was what I was going to ask, is like, how serious is this stuff? And like, how concerned do we need to be, and how much do we need to be protecting our body? Let me
characterize it by, I'll tell a story. When I was 12 years old, which was quite a number of years ago, I smoked cigarettes because I was a big man. And that was many, many years ago. Yeah. And at that time, common knowledge was, you don't have to worry about it. You look like a big man, you act like a big man, you'll be fine. Well, at that time, science knew that there is a direct link with cancer and smoking to the lungs. So if you look at what we know about science, we know the same things in science, that these things at many, many, many levels to the body health can be pretty seriously dangerous. Your head, your heart, your groin area, all the sensitive parts of your bodies are really exposed to greater amounts of emissions. When I was 12, no one had a cell phone. 25 years ago, I had a cell phone, but I had nobody to call. Today, everyone has a cell phone. In the world. And everyone's talking for hours at a time. Yep. So it's getting, in our environment, worse and worse and worse.
Now, can you talk a little bit, I don't know how much you've studied this stuff since you've obviously started a business on it, but can you talk a little bit about the actual mechanism? So obviously we're electrical beings, right. And you know the things that are, getting the greatest amount of electrical stimulus are going to be your brain, your heart, your muscles, right. Your organs, obviously. So can you talk a little bit about what's actually happening inside the body? Yeah.
Believe it or not, over the last 5 years, the research communities have really learned a lot about what's happening. When you have an exposure, an RF exposure, around the 2 gigahertz exposure to a cell in the brain, the cell starts weakening from the constant load that it's receiving from that emissions. Even though it's a low-level thing, it's hitting it more and more. What happens is a little switch goes off in the cell after being diminished from that exposure, and lets calcium into the cell through the calcium channel. Yep. Calcium then is within the cell. When that sees that calcium, you have oxide that builds up. What happens with that? You have DNA damaged cells, double-stranded DNA damaged cells, mutated cells that can turn to more serious conditions, including cancers. So that's a physical mechanism. But what we also know is, like, if you have a cell phone near your head when you're sleeping at night, you may not be able to sleep well. You may have a problem going to sleep. What's going on there? The melatonin that you need to sleep is being disrupted. So it's not just the cell itself that's being damaged, but it's also processes of the body that are being damaged. In fact, when you use a cell phone to your head, it's not just the cell that gets damaged, but your immune system is suppressed, literally suppressed. So you're actually more susceptible to potentially other dangers from those exposures.
Is it possible for us to manipulate the frequencies? So we know that these things live on this, 2 gigahertz frequency. Are they varying frequencies that exist have differing levels of, dangerous potential? Meaning, like, if we took it to a 3, if we took it to a 4, if we took it to a 7, would that be a different result, or would it be amplified effect?
That's a very good question, Ben, because we know in the sequence that we've seen generations of technology enter into our lives, that when it started, it was least offensive to the cell. As we progress, it gets more and more offensive, and I'll explain why. When they did the standards for cell phones and the technologies around us, the federal government, everything was analog. I mean, it was a constant load that was hitting a cell. Let me give you an analogy. If I have a piece of concrete and I have a 10,000-pound steel bar, and I put 10,000 pounds on the concrete won't break. But if I lift it and drop it down, lift it and drop it down, all of a sudden the concrete breaks. Well, that's what's happening to the cell, the evolution of generations of cells. So when you had cell phone connections at 2G to 4G, you had one digital pulsing signal in that signal. Guess what? We've seen increases in many kinds of diseases as a result of that change. So many scientists think that's the case. Well, when you go to 5G, which is actually next year, is starting to be rolled out. They tell you it's a wonderful way to communicate. Well, I don't know. I communicate pretty well already, but what's going on with 5G? They actually have 2 digital pulses within the signal. So where you had one that we knew was damaging to the cell, we now have 2 simultaneously. They call that MIMO, multiple in, multiple out. And the signal is going from the 2 number to 100. What does that mean? It goes from 60 cycles per minute to 1 billion cycles per minute. When you go to an X-ray and get an X-ray, that's 300 billion cycles. So you're a third of an X-ray. So as you increase the speeds, it's becoming more and more dangerous to the cell. How much, we really don't know, because no one's really done any testing.
Hey, I interrupt the podcast to bring you a message about Blueberries. You guys know my infatuation with Blueberries is real. Why? Massive brain benefits from the polyphenols, antioxidants, nitric oxide benefits, so many things about berries in general that I absolutely love, and I make them a consistent part of my day-to-day life. Here's the problem. Eating as many blueberries as you need to see a benefit is very, very expensive. Looking around $5 to $6 per serving when I buy them fresh, and even when I buy them frozen, it's still in the range of $4 to $5 for the size of serving that I'm after, which is somewhere in the range of 2 cups per serving, and I usually have that about twice a day. So what I've started doing, probably for the last 6 months, is after every workout, I'm consuming at least 2 servings of Organifi Red. So as you guys have heard, my friend Drew Canoli started this business, Organifi, and he's doing an incredible job sourcing really high quality ingredients and putting them into convenient servings that allow you to easily access superfoods and amazing nutrients. So Drew has so graciously offered to give all of the Muscle Intelligence listeners or the Muscle Expert podcast listeners 20% off anything you get from Organifi. But you got to act now, because that's not going to last forever. You can use the code Muscle Intelligence when you go to Organifi.com to get 20% off your entire order. So the fact that you know this means that the authorities that be know this. How are we conceivably letting this stuff happen? Like, what do they have some by your knowledge, do they have some course of action that they're planning on applying to mitigate some of these negative effects?
Let me ramble about that a little bit.
Please do.
Yeah, because it's really quite interesting. The FCC approved 5G not many years ago, just a few years ago. The guy who headed the FCC was also the head of the CTIA. It was a wireless consortium of all the service providers. His name was Wheeler, and he was the guy who went to the government and said, the cell phones are a good thing for you. Please keep on buying into what we're saying.
Right.
And then he becomes the head of the FCC. And so if you think someone's watching out for you, I wouldn't anticipate that. I'd make an assumption that if you're going to resolve your environment, you need to take the action because the federal government's not.
So the way I think about that is, you have people like Elon Musk and all these other large companies trying to buy satellites, right? They're trying to be able to take cell phones into Africa. We want more satellites in the air so we can provide cell phones to every single person on the human being on the face of the earth. And you go, well, why? And they know, they have to know the implications of all this EMF. But my thought is they're intentionally creating a problem so that they can be the one to solve it. And that makes them a hero. That also makes them a multi-trillionaire. But so my belief would be if they're creating a problem on purpose, they have to already have the solution.
Right. Well, let's talk about that. By the way, the cell phone business annually is $17 trillion business.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
So, they can say a lot and put a lot of money behind what they say.
I want a lot of money and then to die. That makes a lot of sense. I want a $17 trillion company and then I'm going to die. That's an awesome, expensive grave.
So what you do is you and I decide we're going to go build a network. We're going to provide wireline service. We're going to put cables to somebody's house. And we're going to charge them a lot of money, over $100 a month, for cable service. Maybe we'll throw them in some voice service with a phone. We're going to make a lot of money.
And we're going to record everything they say so we have all the data to market to them in the future.
And so here you go. You have these but you and I say we want to make a lot of money. That cable stuff, boy, does it cost a lot of money to maintain. Okay, here comes 5G. I'm going to provide you incredibly more service than you've never been able to use, which is not true. I have all the service I want. And what they're doing is creating a need to reduce their operations costs. So the cable companies, the cell phone companies, they want to play leapfrog into who's going to make more money next year. So large companies who adopt 5G can now put cable companies out of business because they can bypass it and not have to put a plant in. So all of a sudden, huge amounts of money are driving changes, and changes, for the life of me, I don't know who needs. Why do you need an Internet of Things? That's what they're claiming. You'll be able to connect to anything you want. I'm already enough connected. I don't need to be connected to anybody else. I text somebody, it's more than enough bandwidth to get to the next place where I want to go. I can watch video on my cell phone if I want to. So tell me again why I need all this new network that is totally unproven in terms of its safety to the user.
What are they trying to allude to it being able to do? Like just faster speeds, or has new implications?
So you call up your doctor and say, tell me about that X-ray thing. And he puts it up on the screen and he in real time shows you it on your cell phone.
Gotcha.
So it's like you're going to get instant information. Is that a driving force for me? I don't think so. So there is this perception that, there's this belief that if I spend a lot of money, I convert the network, I put myself in a better position to make a lot of money, and it's going to be hard for others to beat me in this new game. And that's, look who, Time Warner was just bought up by AT&T. Why did they buy content? Because they knew they had 5G and they could transport all the video stuff, which is in their inventory, so they make more money. This literally, the drivers is financial.
So now, before we get into mechanical means of blocking it and changing EMF. Does anyone on this planet have a hope of not being exposed to massive amounts of EMF? Like the health implications aside, you know, we know that that's probably inevitable at some point, but you know, living in a big city compared to a small city, compared to rural farming, does anyone in at least North America have a chance of eluding the negative effects of EMFs?
Absolutely. Actually, if you're aware of your environment, you can minimize exposure. I talk about it as bees in the room. One bee won't kill you. 1,000 bees will within a room. In other words, if you have a cell phone that has a transmitter and you have 1,000 cell phones in a room, that's more likely to impact your body than one would impact your body. So the best way to sort of reduce that level of exposures is simply by turning stuff off, simply by moving stuff away from you. Simple things you can do in your daily life. Like, for example, if you had a Wi-Fi in your house, and particularly if it's near a bedroom, put a timer on it and turn it off at night. And all of a sudden, a major bee disappears in the room simply by turning it off.
But, you know, if you go into my house right now and, I look on my phone to find the Wi-Fi signal that I'm trying to connect to.
Right.
There's not just my Wi-Fi signal. There's like the 17 neighbors and every kid in the area's cell phone. You know, like, how do I protect myself from that?
Yeah, well, here's the other part that's really actually pretty important. The power level diminishes really, really, really fast the farther away it gets from you. It's logarithmic. It's like the worst thing you can do is put it to your head.
Yeah.
If you take it 1 foot away, 80% of the danger to your cell is gone. If you put it 4 foot, 98. So all of a sudden, simply by moving something away from you, you actually reduce the exposure substantially.
Great. So what things do we have to be concerned with? Like, I'm sitting here in a room with light. I go over to the light, I turn the switch. I've obviously got a cell phone over here that's always on airplane mode. All the people around me have cell phones. There's Wi-Fi everywhere.
Right.
What types of things should we start paying attention? I know that the electrical outlet in my house emits some type of EMF. You know, if there's a piece of electronics plugged in, that's emitting some type of electricity. Can you talk a little bit about some of the major culprits for emitting the greatest amount of EMF?
Yeah. You actually bring up a really pretty good point, Ben. Well, there are actually two forms of emissions you worry about. There's the radio frequency stuff, the microwave stuff, which is used to connect to your Wi-Fi. It's used for Bluetooth. It's used for your cell connection. There's various frequencies in the RF range in that space. When you have a light bulb on in your house, the electricity that's feeding that light bulb is emitting a byproduct, which is electromagnetic radiation at 60 hertz. So there's emissions that are coming off your wall. So those are one source. And by the way, simple to fix is just don't sit next to a wall that has wires running through it. But if you're using
but most people have a bed against the wall, right? Like
right. And you got to be careful, especially women. But if you have a toaster, there's like 600 milligauss, which is a measure of how severe it is, how much power it has. That is very dangerous. So don't put your head next to a stove or an oven, because you're going to get not only burned, but you're also going to get electromagnetic radiation. So you really want to be aware of, if you can turn power off within your house anywhere, that reduces the wiring emissions that are coming about. And if you have routers or transmitters that you can turn off, you should turn off. Like, for example, you were smart, you put it in airplane mode, right? But when you have it in regular mode, because you want to get a phone call, do you also have the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi on? And if you do you really need them to be on?
Right.
Think of it. There are 3 bees in the room with that, not 1 bee. So you want to be cautious about how do you reduce the number of bees in the room, particularly if you don't use them. And so it's simply looking at the electronics around you. When you get a Roku or Apple, connect it through Ethernet, wire it in. Don't use the wireless connection. When you connect a laptop, I will not use Wi-Fi. I connect it with a wire rather than Wi-Fi. So I eliminate this potential source, that particular bee in the room.
Right.
And when you use a monitor, which I'm using right now, by the way, is a very new monitor that emits very, very, very low emissions. So if you had a CRT like 10 years ago, they were 150 milligauss. These are 10. So simply going around your house trying to find potential sources and keeping it distance. And if you use it, by the way, and you're not going to, if you pick up your phone and you use it for a couple of minutes, you'll be around a long time. The cell will be able to recover from that exposure. It's when you use it for hours at a time that it becomes more and more dangerous to your cells.
Yeah, and this is why I want to have you on, because most people, myself included, prior to my recent research into this stuff, like, you don't know where it's coming from. You know, you walk through your house and you're saying, well, you know, unplug your whatever. I unplug my microwave, unplug your toaster, right. Unplug all these things. Is that just the solution? Is like making sure there's nothing electrical around you, or making sure all the signals are turned off, or like how many levels?
Actually, you can leave all that stuff plugged in. It's only when there's current flow. So if you have a toaster running and you're not using it, there's no current flow. So there's no emissions coming out of those devices. You don't really need to unplug them for you to be safe. It's when it's plugged in and using power. And generally, these powers are fairly low. And if you sit right in front of a TV 3 inches away, there's a lot of emissions coming from that, particularly if you have Wi-Fi integrated into it. But again, if you're 10, 15 foot away, you're pretty safe. And it's really trying to think about where the sources are and think about time and distance. And if you can, turn it off if you don't need it.
Time and distance sounds like exercise. That's what that's what I teach every day in exercise. So one thing I'm curious about that I picked up, and you know, I feel like I needed a PhD to use the thing, was testing mechanisms. Like I picked up, you know, some of those. You know, you go on Amazon, you pick up like EMF testing apparatus. Right. Do you have any recommended apparatus that don't require?
Actually, you know, I don't. Yeah. Those are notoriously inaccurate.
Yep.
It's not that effective at identifying any real dangers. It's an indicator to some extent, but it's certainly not real evidence that there's a problem. So I generally don't particularly care for them. And if you're going to get one, they have trifold meters that seem to be, you know, popular.
They're called Trifeld.
Meter.
Yep. I think that's the one I got.
Yeah, they work, you know, but they're terribly inaccurate. Like, for example, if you take that and you put it in front of your phone and you put it right on, it may go crazy, but there's maybe nothing wrong. It's only because it can't measure something as close to the transmitter as it indicates it can. It has to be actually a foot away or so before it really gives you an indication of whether it's there.
Very interesting. So are there any other things that come to mind that you think are absolute necessities for people to understand? Let's say you're standing in front of a massive audience, like things that they absolutely need to understand about EMFs.
So, you know, we were talking before about some stuff that's going on about this stuff that's becoming more and more important for us to know.
Yeah.
What I didn't talk about was what research and science is bringing to the table. The federal government did a study, a study of epidemiology with large samples of within the test, and they came up with clear evidence that there was an increase in frontal lobe cancer and heart cancers from exposures that were excessive. There was.
Did they indicate what the exposures were? Like, is it cell phone? Is it, what
well, the way they did it, they actually created an isolation chamber, and they took the environment out. And within the chamber, they created transmitters, cell phone transmitters. That was the sole, and they had those who were absolutely not touched and others that were being radiated. And they compared the populations. And there was clear statistical evidence of those who were exposed had increases in frontal lobe cancers and heart cancers.
It seems like the fair punishment for these people that are advocating this stuff is like, we don't want to kill them, but we just want to like lock them up in a room with 1,000 cell phones all over the floor and just call them all at the same time. And they'll go nuts from the sound and they'll get radiated. Right. You wonder what like the lethal dose would be, right? Like, is there a lethal dose of EMF? Like, if we put so much EMF in your room, you would just, implode? Actually,
frontal lobe cancer has been increasing compounded 2% per year for the last 10 years. We are slowly being killed off. There are some researchers, and I don't purport to their arguments. I don't, because I don't think there's evidence that that's true. But they talk about DNA damage, like when you have double-stranded DNA damage.
Yeah.
And it fixes itself a little bit. Yeah. It now is a mutated cell. What happens if that was in the womb of a 12-year-old girl?
Right.
Right? She has a baby. That mutated cell is transmitted to her subtending generation, and their subtending generation. So there are some that saying, because of the increases in exposure in our lives, we actually could be potentially creating an environment which we're basically killing ourselves off. That extreme I don't agree to, but that is, by some, they think it's legitimate. And they talk about 5 generations and it's a problem. But we do know there's DNA damage. We do know there's mutated cells. And at the same time, ADHD, Alzheimer's, neurological stuff. When you have a cell phone constantly to your head, you tell your wife, I'm getting headaches. And when I was talking to you a moment ago, you said, I'm a little foggy today. That can be from a cell phone. So there's those instant responses by exposures that are neurological, but then there are the ADHDs and the Alzheimer's, which are long-term exposure effects of exposure. And there's clear evidence that there are those linkages. So this is not to be treated lightly, particularly if you have kids. In my opinion, preventative action really has a significant benefit for your family.
Yeah. My conspiracy theorist mind says it's just population control, right? Like, we're getting to the point in medicine where we can extend your life, or health, we can extend your life. But, it's like, hey, we got 7 billion people on the planet. Somebody out there is trying to control the population.
Yeah. I don't go that far. And of course, I had a friend of mine who actually was the head of one of the largest cell phone companies in the country, if not the world, because I was in the telecom space for some years. And he saw my products and he said, boy, that's really good stuff. He said, but Dan, I can't use them. The minute I use it, everyone will think there's a problem, and that will hurt my business.
How did he feel about that? Like, he knew that it was going to protect him, but he couldn't protect himself. That's a tough place to be.
You were taking a monetizing for your industry more important than your own personal life or your family's life. So I didn't particularly like that position he took, but that was it. And by the way, the guy's not smart enough to figure out how he would do this intentionally. It's like it's evolved so organically over the years. Look, we made 10 billion this year. No, we made 17 billion this year. 17 trillion now. All of a sudden, he's making more and more money, and all these attitudes of protection get bigger and bigger and bigger.
I get it, because everyone around him is telling him, they're looking for the research. They're cherry picking the research that says it's not not bad.
Oh, that's a really important point, Ben. There was a Dr. Paul. He's actually one of the first researchers to identify the calcium
voltage
channel stuff.
Calcium channels,
and he's a really good guy. He actually thought that that he could prove without a doubt there was subtending generation problems and has proved in his laboratory that's the case. Mm-hmm. So it's like very real in his case.
Yeah.
And so anyway, it's real.
It's you know, it's the irony. It's so many things. It's, you know, it's EMFs. There are this DNA damage that's being passed down. There's estrogens that are being toxins that are being passed down. Like, we know that all these multi-generational things are really real. And, you know, you wonder if it's the cause of all these negative health implications that we're being born into.
I'm working with a neurologist, biochemists, and a couple other experts trying to better understand. Are you electrically hypersensitive? Are you electrically chemically sensitive? 20% or more of the population, when they get exposed to volatile organic compounds, gases, you go putting gas in your tank and you smell it and it really bothers you, that's multiple chemical sensitivity. Well, that's what's happening in our environment, where you could take a cell phone and you could put it close to your head and you instantly, it hurts you. So that's
me. I literally, I can't wear I just recently bought a watch. I won't say the name, but I bought a watch and I can feel it on my wrist. Like, I can feel I'm like, this is just a big problem. Take the shit away from me. I feel like I'm the canary in the coal mine. I walk into a room, I can feel the EMFs in the room.
Yeah. And by the way, over 20% of the population feels it exactly like you.
Wow.
Of that, 80% are women.
Wow.
And so we're trying to figure out, is it the hormones? Is it the estrogen? Is it the pills that keep them from getting pregnant? You know, what is it that's changing along with the environment of more and more exposure?
Yeah.
We really don't know very much sufficient to actually be very effective at treating these symptoms.
Yeah.
And what we know, it gets worse.
I haven't always felt that way. Like, I felt like it's only in the last couple of years that I've really started to pay. And I also feel like I know my body better. Like, I know when something feels good. I know when something doesn't feel bad. So I just kind of chalked it up to that. It's like, I'm just paying attention a lot more now.
Yeah.
But, no joke. Like, if I put my cell phone in my pocket, I can feel my hip. I'm like, okay, take this down. Like, that's why it's always on airplane mode when it's around me, because I can literally feel it.
Yeah. Remember the pagers?
Yeah.
I used to have a pager 30 years ago, and I had it on my belt. My muscles would hurt and hurt, and I took it away. It was fine.
Yep.
So we really do know that environment's really evolving, and we know there's some very serious consequences. Dr. Paul, for example, thinks that Alzheimer's is directly related to the triggers of calcium in the brain, the cells of the brain, and that's what's causing the confusion and adherence of the cell-to-cell problem.
Yeah, it's probably many layers, right? Because we know that it's to do with insulin resistance, like type 3 diabetes, what they're calling. It's also to do, I'm sure it's like, we're electrical beings. I recently interviewed Gerald Pollack, who, if you know, Gerald Pollack is talking about you know, structured water and the idea that we're just electrical beings, and if you disrupt that electrical signal in any way, you're going to see things change.
Yeah, and so one layer more. It is the electrical switch that's being switched in the cell. To have the calcium penetrate. You muck around with that, and all of a sudden, who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, everything just stops working.
In fact, if I asked you to put your arm out, and I push down at the end, you resist. If I asked you to do it again, and I took a cell phone, and I put it right to your heart, you couldn't resist me pushing it down anymore. It's literally interfering with the controls of your body. Why? For the very reason you just said. We're electrical bodies.
So I need to buy like a tin hat. I need to just walk around wearing a full body tin suit.
What are something about Soul? He has a tin hat in the show.
Yeah,
he's electrically hypersensitive.
So now moving along, I mean, one of the reasons I really wanted to have it on here, on top of being an expert on this stuff, is you're actually someone who's constantly evolving and engineering new ways of protecting us against this stuff. So tell me about that. So tell me about some of the key mechanisms you've come up with to protect us.
Well, for example, we have earphones, and when you use this, when you listen to music from your iPod or your cell phone or wherever you're listening to, and you have a wire that goes to your head,
like I do right now.
Like you do right now. There's radiation.
Getting radiated,
Yeah, and it's very low.
And now is it? I was going to ask, is it worse to have those big? Is it better to have those big ones that don't go physically inside your ear because it's a little bit of distance, or it's just no?
There's really no distance. What we're doing is you got to eliminate the electrical signal. So what we do is we convert it to an acoustical coupling between that and the ear. So we just eliminate the emission.
So are you doing like those tubes? Is that what it is?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, that's what they are. It's a simple choice, right? It's a simple solution. Eliminate the signal. And so we have those kinds of ways of helping protect the body, particularly for those who use it all the time. When you look at a screen on a monitor, and you do it at night, then you decide you want to go to bed. Sometimes you have a little bit of problem sleeping. What's going on? Your circadian rhythm is being screwed up. And there's a component of the spectrum of light that comes off a monitor, that the blue component. It's like right next to the ultraviolet stuff. And we know that's damaging to the retina. And it also disrupts your rhythm.
Yep. Suprachiasmatic nucleus.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And by the way, there's so much more we're learning about the impact. Imbalance, for example. You can be imbalanced from that exposure. You can have premature macular degeneration. There's all sorts of stuff now people are pointing fingers to. And so we have a device. It takes the blue component out of the signal. It's all. You know, it's like a pair of sunglasses, but it's shaded solely for the blue component. And so that's another way we offer protection in the environment they live.
I've noticed that actually makes a massive difference on my sleep quality. If I block some of the blue light, I'm usually pretty good with not getting on my phone and computer after like 7 p.m. But I run an online business, and some days, you know, I'm transparently up till 2 in the morning doing work. You know, if you have a deadline or something. So I do find it makes a big difference if I block the blue light, which is there's a number of companies selling glasses. That's what you guys have, is glasses, blue light. Yeah,
we have glasses for. And actually, it's more the circadian rhythm you should be worried about, because everything's screwed up at that point. Yeah. And so you don't want to muck around with that stuff. And then we have, as originally designed for the lap, we have a device to protect the shield you from emissions passing to the groin area. We have devices.
Are you able to share what that's made from? Is it just like?
Actually, when I was in Bell Labs many years ago, we wanted to put a transatlantic connection from the U.S. to have a cell phone, a telephone connection. So the fish would eat the wire up. So we had to find a jacket that would protect the wire. And so there was an exotic alloy that was created for that very purpose, so the fish wouldn't eat the stuff. And so that actually, remember we were talking those stuff in the wires in your room? That's extremely low frequency stuff. And that's at typically 60 hertz. So we have a shielding that retracts that component and eliminates it. And then we have conductive and absorption functions within using different materials. And it's the combination of all the three that brings you the total protection.
Amazing. So are you offering any, cell phone cases or anything like that has
yeah, we do. EMF we try to do it for cell phone cases. We have universal ones. We have it for the Apple family. We have it for tablets. If your kids are using it, particularly, I really get upset when I see this around kids. Yeah. We have universal cases for that. If you're going to Europe and you want your data stolen, we actually have a conceal shield, a device that you put your cell phone in, you put your credit cards in, and it can't be scanned. Nothing in, nothing out. And so we have that kind of device. We only created that because so many people asked us, our customers, that could you shield our data? It's more and more being stolen.
It's just because you're so close to somebody else, they're able to tap into your phone?
Yeah, they can actually scan your cell phone if it's on. They can scan your magnetic strip. Right. So you want to provide protection from that. So we have a whole array of of those kinds of products we offer.
Yeah.
We have a whole array of new products coming out, which is for pregnant women.
Oh, wow.
Do you know, if, I'm not saying your wife's pregnant, but let's say she was, and she had a cell phone in her hand, in her pocket, for the first several months of being conceiving. She's 3 times more likely to have a miscarriage.
Wow.
That's how.
I'm curious about breastfeeding too, right? Like all the.
Oh, yeah. Well, as you also may know, Ben, if you take a cell phone, women were putting it in their bras.
Yeah.
And they had these marks and cancers right where they put the phone.
Yeah.
So if that wasn't a good indicator of the potential damage,
we know it's there, right? We know it's definite.
Yeah.
Now, I just want to protect myself. So my biggest thing right now is my family. I've got young kids, and I want to protect my home. Daniel, what recommendations do you have to protect us in the home? Do you have things that can block signals inside the house other than turning stuff off? Actually,
I do not, but I do believe you can eliminate almost all, if not all, bees in the room. If you're diligent, like for example, smart meters. Everyone's complaining about smart meters these days, right? Well, if the smart meter is on the garage and you have a 2-car garage and then your bedroom, it's a logarithmic drop in load.
Right.
You don't have to worry about anything. But if it's on your bedroom wall, move your bed. You know what I mean? Take that bed and physically move it on the opposite wall.
Right.
And you're more safe than if you leave it there.
What do you think about electrical cars?
They have not considered in their design shielding of emission. Anything that is electrical generates an emission.
It's like a big radiation box.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. A winding, a motor winding. And those, by the way, are DC. The stuff we were talking about before is AC.
Okay.
Alternating current versus direct current.
Yep.
And it turns out that it's true that a direct current electromagnetic radiation is as dangerous as an alternate current electromagnetic radiation. So, as you're pointing out, it's as damaging as any other exposure that you have, and you really should be considering it. Now, they didn't design it by intent, but the current flow is in the motor, motors at the wheels. So a lot of the emissions are coming out of the wheels. So because of that, and because of the distance, you're more safe.
It's more like 2 to 3 feet, right? Like it's not a lot of distance.
Well, remember, 2 foot.
Better than a cell phone.
Right.
But most people are driving in an electrical car talking on their cell phone.
I would not buy an electric car for that reason. I know they haven't spent the money to do the shielding for that to make it safe. And somebody like you, then you'll feel it.
Yeah.
We coach a lot of those who are hypersensitive, and their lives are living hell because it doesn't take much exposure at all. Some of them can't even go outside. It is so bad. They eliminate the bees in the room, but yet right outside their house,
right.
the exposure is high.
Yeah, I hope I never get to that point because I can be aware of it. But
and Ben, that's why you got to watch what you do because it progressively gets worse as you get older. So regiment and following the rules are sort of pretty important for you.
I'm just going to move to the rainforest and be done with it. I mean, that's the bottom line, right?
Actually, some people have, as you may know.
That's not even a joke, man. I'll be living in a grass hut somewhere and enjoying fresh fish from the ocean, man, that I caught with my hands. Yeah,
who is it? Dave Asprey. He's Bulletproof. He started Bulletproof.
Yep.
Dave moved to an island.
Yeah, northern Canada.
Right. Yeah. Right, exactly. He said, enough of this. And his family. He was actually considering his family.
Smart guy, man. If you could afford it, get the hell out of here. And that's what I say to my wife all the time. Like, as long as I had a computer, I can move. Let's get the hell out of here, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
Let's go move to Costa Rica. It's harder
to get those bees in the room out of the environment.
Yeah.
Because it's being more and more every day in your life.
Daniel, tell us a little bit about where we can get Defendershield products.
Well, first of all, if you want to learn anything about it, you should look for our book.
Radiation Nation.
Radiation Nation, yeah. The fallout of modern technology. I'll tell you what my son and I wrote it. It was because there was a lot of science that was clear and evident of dangers, and none of us knew about it. And then there was a whole bunch of us that were panicking because their lives were doom and gloom, but they didn't understand what the real facts were.
Now, is there anything that we haven't talked about today that's in that book that we should pay attention to?
No, I think we hit the top
points
pretty well. Yeah, if you go to Amazon, I think we have it for like 99 cents right now. I'm not making any money on it. I'm really literally giving it away just about so people can learn what their environment looks like. So Radiation Nation is on Amazon if you want, or you can go to Defendershield.com. Defendershield.com is our website that offers the book, along with all of our products.
Right.
And by the way, we also offer all the research that if you want to know more about ADHD being influenced with emissions, we actually have a learning section on our website that gives you the most current study work about that subject. So at least you have a little bit of understanding of what we think is and what is not. So Defendershield.com is a good place to learn more. And also, if you choose, you can find various products to help you protect yourself. I invented this stuff for my kids because I didn't want to be a victim of our environment. And there were some things we could do that could help. And so, like, we tried to offer it as, I didn't start off with trying to create a company, by the way. It was like all of a sudden people began thinking in the health space, by the way, in your space.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
you were concerned about what was going on in your environment.
Yeah.
And you were learning more and more as you went along that there are things in your environment you got to be aware of.
I think it's a blessing that I can feel it, right? Not everyone's aware of it. Most people, if you can't feel it, you're not aware of it. So I think, every time I feel it, I'm grateful for that because it allows me to make a change. If I feel my cell phone in my pocket, well, don't put your cell phone in your pocket. So I just happen to be the guy who can lead that conversation because, man, if I walk into a room and the EMFs are high, I feel my whole body.
Oh, yeah.
Like I feel it ache, and I'm able to identify that feeling now. So I'm so aware of it. So we're so grateful for the information you're putting out and this research that you're doing. So please continue to do it. And as more things evolve, please keep us posted. You're smack dab in the middle of our environment week now. So we're doing podcasts around everything to do with the environment. So light, EMFs, water, even environmental inputs as far as food, estrogens, things like that, pesticides, all those things are, a big part of the conversation and allowing people to live their greatest life. That's what we're ultimately trying to do.
That's right. And it does need to be managed by you and no one else because no one else is going to do it for you. Yeah. So you really need to own your environment.
So I'm going to direct some people to your website because truthfully, I think everyone should be picking this stuff up, particularly cell phone blockers. And if you're ever on a laptop, like something to protect you from the EMFs. I'll tell you one thing that I feel that's really odd. Maybe you have a solution for this. If I'm typing on my laptop, I can feel the electricity coming through my hands. I don't know if there's like a case you have that I can like put over my
well, that
keyboard.
Is extremely low frequency emissions.
Yeah.
On your keyboard, is it connected to your desktop or
no, my laptop? I find it's worse when it's plugged in.
Okay, that's good because what you've done is the first step of minimizing the source emissions, which is the laptop.
Yeah.
So that's good. Believe it or not, our Defender pad. Remember, I talked about it absorbing.
Yeah.
We actually have several years of experience where those who are electrically hypersensitive, they do all the things, they push everything out, and they still feel it in their hands. Well, if they put the Defender pad on below the keyboard, it actually helps them.
Yeah, I wonder if it's at some level the reverberations of, like, it's obviously some type of reverberation, but it's also obviously some electricity.
It's really, really, really low stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's enough to be redirected a tiny bit below, and that's enough for you to feel the difference. You are sensitive. You are a hypersensitive guy. Not emotionally, but physically.
Yeah, don't tell my wife that, right?
That's right.
Just kidding. Daniel, thank you so much for your time. And we will link to your websites and your book in the show notes. Please, anything new that comes out, you let us know, and we'll be the first ones to get behind you.
Well, thanks so much, Ben. I appreciate you inviting us on today.
Thank you. All right, Trevor, that's a wrap. Daniel, that was awesome. Thank you so much. You're an expert on this stuff, so I'm very grateful. Trevor just is requesting if you could leave your browser open for a minute. Oh, okay. Great.
You know, it was funny. 5 years ago when I started this stuff, I didn't know if anybody would buy anything or would even begin understanding it. What's really happened is with this 5G stuff, all of a sudden everyone wants to learn about it. And by the way, I hate talking about it because you're going to have those towers 850 feet apart. I mentioned the neurologist and the biochemist. They were in California, in Washington State, and they were at a small place. They had just gotten a new cable service, and they called me up and they said, "Oh my God, there's something going on in our house. I have these headaches going on." So I said, "Well, go to your router. Look at what the service was to your router." It was a 5G router.
5G.
They were field trialing a 5G router. And where a normal router never bothered them, they were both bothered by the 5G.
What are some of the implications on an airplane? I'm curious about that because I fly a lot. And is there any way to protect us?
No.
Nothing you can do, huh? Not from the outside.
I had the federal government approach us about that problem. But when the moment they decided to put transmitters every other chair, it's bees in the room.
Yeah. So even wearing, some people have those like Schumann frequency.
That's nonsense.
Doesn't do anything.
Those are pure nonsense.
Yeah.
There's no scientific evidence of any performance whatsoever of reduction of emissions.
Like earthing mats and stuff like that. I know that has a different
Actually,
benefit.
earthing mats are, if you have an earthing mat, when you run into a door and you have socks on, wool socks, and you touch the door knob, you'll get a little spark, right? So there's static electricity that's being absorbed by your body,
right?
And so you're becoming capacitor,
right,
for that energy. When you put your toe on a grounding pad, it's the short to ground for the body, so it dumps all that static stuff that was building up in your body to the ground. So there's good benefit to having that, right? It's good for you. If you had a cell phone on your head and you had your toe on the ground, you're still going to die of frontal lobe cancer because you're not diverting that energy that's hitting the cell. So some people believe grounding pads help them with these environments. They don't know what they're talking about. They're not engineers.
Gotcha. So as far as protecting your head from cell phone radiation, you guys actually have cases that will block?
We block.
Okay.
Yeah, we eliminate it.
So something that actually goes between the cell phone and your head?
Yeah, yeah. One of the things
and still has decent sound?
It actually improves it. It stabilizes electronics. We didn't have enough time to go through this, but if you put your finger up and you think about it as a transmitter, think about a tiny little ball getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
Okay.
It fills the room, right? And there's all these balls going out. It goes out to the cell tower. Well, that's what's referred to as omnidirectional. If you put something in front of it where it can't come through, it's still going out.
Right.
All we did was stop the signal from going towards the head. Very simple solution to the problem, but very important. Solution you should think of, particularly if you use the phone a lot.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to visit your site as soon as we're done. Daniel, again, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, buddy. Appreciate it.
Join us on benpokulski.com to learn the cutting-edge techniques to take control of your body, your brain, and create your greatest life.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Ben Pakulski and the producers, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest and products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical problem, consult a licensed physician.